What if the greatest empire the world has ever known wasn't Rome, wasn't Egypt, wasn't even Atlantis, but a name you were never taught in school? Tartaria. Tonight, on Slumber Expeditions, we explore the compelling, yet controversial theory of a proposed civilization that, according to its proponents, once spanned the entire northern hemisphere from the plains of America to the steppes of Siberia, leaving behind a legacy of magnificent architecture and advanced technology. We will examine the anomalous buildings that defy standard historical explanation, the mysterious maps that hint at a different geopolitical past, and the puzzling historical accounts that speak of a lost, global culture. Our comprehensive journey will piece together the evidence from architectural marvels, cartographic curiosities, and tantalizing historical fragments, building a portrait of an empire that history forgot and questioning the very foundations of our accepted historical narrative. So before you settle in, if you're finding comfort in these historical mysteries, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel, but only if you genuinely like what we do here. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you are listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to connect with a global community of curious minds who share this fascination with history's greatest enigmas. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's speculative journey together. Settle in and let your mind open to the possibility of a world we once knew, but have since been taught to forget. You are standing in the hushed, hallowed halls of a great library, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and old leather. Before you, spread across a vast oak table, is a map, not a modern, digitally rendered satellite image, but a sprawling, hand-drawn vellum chart from the 16th or 17th century. The coastlines are familiar, yet strangely distorted. The continents bulge in odd proportions. Your eyes are drawn to the vast, uncharted expanse of the northern hemisphere. There, written in elegant, looping Latin script, is a name that echoes through the ages: Tartaria. It is not a small region. It is a colossal empire, stretching from the Black Sea across the entirety of Siberia, and on some maps, spanning the Bering Strait into the unknown lands of the American West. This is not the Siberia of our modern imagination, a frigid, sparsely populated wilderness. This is Tartaria Magna, Great Tartaria, a land depicted with great rivers, sprawling cities, and mountain ranges, a place of significance and power. As you trace the faded ink with your finger, you feel a profound disconnection. The world presented on this parchment is not the world you learned about in school. This cartographic ghost, repeated across centuries by different mapmakers from different nations, suggests a consensus reality that has since vanished, leaving behind only these paper relics as silent, stubborn witnesses to a different past. The cartographic evidence for a significant Tartarian entity is undeniable and spans centuries. One of the most famous examples is the 1569 world map by Gerardus Mercator, the father of modern cartography. On his map, Tartaria is a dominant feature of northern Asia, subdivided into regions like Tartaria Asiatica and Tartaria Deserta. Similarly, the 1570 Theatrum Orbis Terrarum by Abraham Ortelius, considered the first modern atlas, clearly delineates a vast Tartarii sive magni chemi regni, or Tartaria, or the kingdom of the Great Khan. These were not obscure productions. They were the state-of-the-art geographical knowledge of their time, used by navigators, merchants, and monarchs. As we move into the 18th century, the presence of Tartaria on maps persists. The 1705 map by Guillaume de Lisle shows a Grande Tartarie, and even as late as 1794, a map by the London publisher Lorry and Whittle depicts an independent Chinese Tartary and independent Tartary. The consistency is striking. For over 300 years, the most respected cartographers in Europe were depicting a major geopolitical entity named Tartaria. The theory posits that these maps were not mere speculation or the repetition of ancient, outdated myths, but were reflections of a contemporary reality, a reality that began to be systematically altered and suppressed in the 19th century. But what of the people who inhabited this vast land? Historical accounts from travelers and diplomats add another layer of intrigue. The Venetian explorer Marco Polo, in his travels of the 13th century, frequently referred to the Tartar people and the realms of the Great Khan, whose empire was vast and sophisticated. Later, in the 16th and 17th centuries, European emissaries to the Russian court wrote dispatches describing the lands to their east. They spoke not of a barren wasteland, but of a region with its own distinct cultures and potential. Sigismund von Herberstein, a Habsburg diplomat who visited Moscow in the 1500s, wrote in his Notes on Muscovite Affairs about the Tartars and the lands of Sibir, contributing to the European understanding of this vast territory. These accounts, when read through the lens of the Tartaria theory, are not descriptions of nomadic, disparate tribes, but glimpses of a complex, settled civilization that European powers were only just beginning to encounter and comprehend. The maps and the text seem to tell a congruent story, one that stands in stark contrast to the official narrative of Siberia as a historical void, a land only properly developed and settled by the Russian Empire from the 17th century onwards. The most compelling cartographic mysteries, however, are the ones that suggest a global, not just a Eurasian, Tartarian presence. Proponents of the theory point to maps like the 1650 Novatotius Terram Orbis Tabula by Johannes Blau, which shows Tartaria stretching deep into the North American continent, with place names that bear no resemblance to later colonial nomenclature. There are maps that depict California as an island, a geographical error that persisted for a long time, but also maps that show a vast, inland sea in the American West, or a strait separating the continent. These anomalous features are often dismissed as the errors of ignorant cartographers. But the alternative view asks, what if they were not errors? What if they were accurate representations of a world that was fundamentally different before a cataclysmic, resetting event? The theory suggests that the mud floods and unexplained architecture found across America and Europe are linked to this lost Tartarian civilization, and that the old maps are preserving the memory of its global reach. The gradual shrinking and eventual disappearance of Tartaria from world maps throughout the 19th century is seen not as a correction of error, but as the cartographic manifestation of a cover-up, a redrawing of the world to fit a new, manufactured historical paradigm. As the 19th century dawned, the name Tartaria began its slow fade from official cartography. The reasons given by conventional history are logical: the expansion of the Russian Empire eastward, the scientific expeditions that mapped Siberia with greater accuracy, and the consolidation of the Qin dynasty in China, which absorbed the territories once labeled Chinese Tartary. As precise borders were drawn, the catch-all term Tartaria became obsolete. It was replaced with specific names like Siberia, Mongolia, and Manchuria. But for those who subscribe to the Tartaria theory, this explanation is insufficient. They see a deliberate and coordinated campaign of remapping. The vast, unified entity was broken up into smaller, more manageable political units. Its history was recontextualized. The Tartars were relegated to being a minor, nomadic group, and their alleged grand achievements were reassigned to others or simply forgotten. The maps we use today, clean, precise, and devoid of the mystery of Tartaria Magna, are therefore the end product of this process. They are not necessarily more truthful, but rather, they represent the victorious narrative, the story told by the powers that remained after Tartaria's supposed fall. The old maps, then, become a form of resistance, a ghost in the machine of history, challenging us to question what we think we know about the shape of our world and the story of who shaped it. Scattered across the globe, from the heart of Moscow to the Great Plains of the American Midwest, stand buildings that, according to the standard historical narrative, seem to appear almost out of nowhere. They are architectural marvels, often constructed in what is termed the neoclassical, Beaux-Arts, or Greek Revival styles. They are characterized by their immense scale, their grandiose columns, their majestic domes, and their intricate, almost impossibly precise stonework. Conventional history attributes these structures to the 18th and 19th centuries, built by newly wealthy nations and industrialists as symbols of their power and enlightenment. But the Tartaria theory poses a radical question. What if these buildings are not what they seem? What if they are not the fledgling efforts of a young America or a modernizing Russia, but the surviving remnants of a much older, global civilization that had mastered architecture and engineering on a scale that we struggle to comprehend even today? These structures, in this view, are not newly built, but repurposed, the surviving infrastructure of the lost Tartarian Empire. Consider the architectural landscape of Washington, D.C. The White House, the U.S. Capitol Building, the Smithsonian Institution, they are all presented as being constructed in the early days of the American Republic, largely in the first few decades of the 1800s. The official story involves architects like James Hoban and Benjamin Latrobe working with teams of laborers, many of whom were enslaved, to build these icons from the ground up. Yet, the Tartaria theory points to numerous perplexing details. How were such immense quantities of sandstone and marble quarried, transported, and carved with such precision using the technology of the era? Why do so many of these buildings feature subterranean levels, tunnels, and hidden chambers that are not part of the official tour? Why do early photographs of these cities, from the 1840s and 1850s, often show these magnificent structures standing proudly in what appear to be otherwise sparse or partially constructed urban landscapes, sometimes even seeming to be partially submerged in mud? The theory suggests that these buildings are pre-existing. The fledgling United States government did not build them. It simply found them partially buried and in a state of ruin after a cataclysmic event and moved in, claiming them as their own and creating a founding myth to explain their presence. This pattern repeats itself with startling consistency in major cities across the United States and Europe. The old central post offices, the state capitals, the grand libraries, and the monumental courthouses that form the core of so many American cities all share a similar aesthetic of grandeur and solidity. In St. Louis, there is the old courthouse with its massive dome. In New York, the original Penn Station was a breathtaking Roman-style hall, since demolished, but its sheer scale and opulence seemed to far exceed its stated purpose as a train station. In San Francisco, the Palace of Fine Arts, with its weeping women and colossal rotunda, feels like a relic from a much older, more melancholic world. Across the Atlantic, in St. Petersburg, Russia, the city itself is a museum of this architectural style. The Winter Palace, the Admiralty Building, the Kazan Cathedral, their scale is imperial, their design flawless. Conventional history attributes them to architects like Bartolomeo Rastrelli, working for the Russian Tsars. The alternative theory asks, did the Tsars build them, or did they, like the American presidents, simply inherit a pre-built capital city from a previous, more advanced civilization? The uniformity of the style, from the Neva River to the Potomac, is presented not as shared fashion, but as evidence of a shared, global source. The engineering feats represented by these buildings are another point of deep contention. The construction of massive stone domes, like that of the US Capitol or St. Isaac's Cathedral in St. Petersburg, presents immense technical challenges. The weight distribution, the precise cutting of the stone, the scaffolding required, it was a monumental undertaking even for the late 19th century. Yet, according to official records, these projects were completed with relative speed. The theory questions this. It points to the sheer mass of the materials, the precision of the joinery that often seems to preclude the use of simple hand tools, and the intricate metalwork that holds some of these structures together. Furthermore, there is the question of the foundations. These are incredibly heavy buildings. How are their foundations laid so perfectly? The existence of extensive, multi-level basements and sub-basements, often built with the same fine masonry as the upper floors, suggests a level of underground construction that seems disproportionate to the stated purpose of the building. In the Tartarian hypothesis, these are not mere basements. They are the surviving levels of structures that were once much taller, with their lower floors having been buried by a great cataclysm, most commonly theorized as a global mud flood. The concept of a mud flood is central to this architectural mystery. Proponents point to a wealth of old photographs from the mid to late 19th century that appear to show buildings with their first floors partially buried in soil. These are not just isolated instances. Examples can be found across Europe, Asia, and North America. In some photos, what were once grand archways and windows are now at ground level, with new doors and windows crudely cut into the stonework above the new soil line. The official explanation is that these are simply the results of street-level raising projects, a common practice in growing cities to improve drainage and infrastructure. However, the Tartaria theory posits a far more dramatic event, a global catastrophe in the recent past, perhaps the 18th or early 19th century, that involved massive geological and hydrological upheaval, depositing layers of silt and mud across the continents, bearing the first floors of the existing Tartarian world. This event, they argue, reset civilization. The surviving population, having lost their technology and history, were forced to start over. The old, magnificent buildings were dug out, their original purposes forgotten, and they were repurposed by the new societies that emerged from the mud. The builders we credit, the Hobins, the Latrobes, the Rastrellis, were not the original architects, but the renovationists, the people who figured out how to patch up these ancient, mysterious giants and put them to new use, all the while crafting a new history that erased the true builders from memory. Dotting the landscapes of Europe, Asia, and the Americas are peculiar, geometric earthworks known as star forts. Their names are often familiar. The citadel of Lille in France, Fort Bourtange in the Netherlands, the fortress of Petrovaradin in Serbia, Castillo de San Marcos in Florida, Fort J in New York. They are characterized by their distinctive star-like shape, with a series of triangular bastions projecting out from a central body, creating a complex polygon. From above, they look less like military installations and more like intricate snowflakes or mandalas carved into the earth. Conventional history categorizes them as a specific evolution of military architecture, designed between the 15th and 18th centuries to counteract the power of cannon fire and provide overlapping fields of defensive fire. They are presented as purely functional structures, the pinnacle of pre-industrial fortress design. But from the perspective of the Tartaria theory, this explanation is deeply unsatisfactory. The sheer number, the global distribution, the immense labor required, and the mysterious similarities in their design point to a different, far more enigmatic origin. What if these star forts were not built by rival European kings and colonial powers, but were part of a global, unified system belonging to a previous world civilization? The first striking anomaly is their global proliferation. There are thousands of these structures. They are found across the entire European continent, from Scotland to the Crimea. They were built by the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, and the British in their colonies across the Americas, Africa, and Asia. But they are also found in places like India, Japan, and Russia, often predating significant European contact. This global uniformity is puzzling. How did this highly specific and complex design become a worldwide standard almost simultaneously? The conventional narrative relies on the diffusion of ideas through military engineers and textbooks. Yet, the speed and consistency of this adoption across fiercely competitive and often isolated nations seems remarkable. The Tartaria theory offers a simpler, if more radical, explanation. These forts were not built by the nations that claim them. They are pre-existing. They were part of a global network of infrastructure belonging to the Tartarian Empire, a network that was already in place. The European colonial powers, upon arriving in new lands, often found these imposing, empty structures and simply occupied them, later claiming to have built them as a show of their own power and technological prowess. The design and construction of these forts raise further questions. The geometry is incredibly precise. The angles of the bastions are calculated to eliminate blind spots, creating a perfect, synergistic field of fire. The walls are massively thick, often made of earth faced with brick or stone, designed to absorb cannonball impacts. But the construction would have been a Herculean effort, moving the immense quantities of earth and stone required, without modern machinery, would have consumed vast resources and manpower for years, even decades, for a single fort. Yet, historical records often attribute the building of these forts to colonial governors with limited resources and small, often ill-equipped, garrisons. The theory questions the feasibility of this. It also points to the frequent presence of features that seem to go beyond pure military necessity. Many star forts have intricate, patterned cobblestones in their courtyards, elegant gateways, and sometimes even ornate churches or buildings at their center. Some are built over natural springs or aquifers. Their layouts often incorporate sacred geometry, with proportions related to the golden ratio. This has led to speculation that their primary purpose was not military but something else entirely, perhaps as energy generators, using telluric currents of the Earth, or as nodes in a global geographical system for communication or transportation, their star shapes acting as a kind of resonant technology lost to us today. The historical narrative surrounding these forts is often vague and contradictory. Many are said to have been built on the sites of older, mysterious fortifications. Their dates of construction are frequently uncertain, with histories that are muddled. A common theme is that they were modernized or rebuilt in the 17th or 18th century, which, in the Tartarian view, could be a euphemism for repurposed after being found. Furthermore, there is the curious issue of their military efficacy. While they are formidable-looking, the historical record is surprisingly sparse with examples of star forts being successfully defended in a prolonged siege according to their design purpose. Many were captured, often through blockade or treachery rather than direct assault on their sophisticated walls. This has led to the question, were they ever really intended for the kind of gunpowder-era warfare we associate them with? Or was their military use a secondary adaptation by the new societies that inherited them, who, misunderstanding their original function, assigned them the purpose they could best comprehend? Defense? The fate of the star forts is as intriguing as their origin. From the mid-19th century onwards, as rifled artillery made their high walls vulnerable, They were largely abandoned as military installations. Many were demolished to make way for expanding cities. Others were turned into parks, museums, or, ironically, prisons. This decommissioning happened with striking synchrony across the globe. In the standard view, this was a simple case of technological obsolescence. In the Tartarian theory, it represents the final chapter in the cover-up. Once the new historical narrative was firmly in place, and the memory of the old world had faded, these obvious, physical anomalies of a lost civilization became an inconvenient truth. They were too numerous and too massive to destroy entirely, so they were instead neutralized, stripped of their original context and meaning, and relegated to the status of quaint historical curiosities. Their true purpose, and the identity of their true builders, was relegated to the realm of forgotten history, their silent, geometric forms standing as a testament to a world we are no longer supposed to remember. As we conclude this first part of our journey into the mysterious world of Tartaria, we like to extend a special thank you for listening. If you're finding comfort in these explorations of history's hidden corners, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Slumber Expeditions. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to connect with our global community of curious minds. You can also share which part of the story has captivated you the most so far. It would be wonderful to start a conversation around it. Now, let the mystery of these maps, buildings, and star forts settle in your mind as we prepare to continue our exploration into the theories of a great reset and the technology this lost empire may have possessed. The theory of a lost Tartarian empire rests upon a foundational and dramatic premise that a global cataclysm of unimaginable scale struck the Earth in the relatively recent past, perhaps only a few hundred years ago. This was not a slow decline, but a rapid, civilization-ending event that reset human history. Proponents of this idea point to a pervasive, yet oddly unexamined, thread in local histories and folklore across the world: stories of a great flood. While the biblical deluge is the most famous, nearly every culture has its own flood myth. The Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, the Hindu story of Manu, the Maya story in the Popol Vuh, the Chinese legend of Gun and Yu. Conventional archaeology views these as allegorical or as memories of localized river floods. The Tartaria theory, however, takes them at face value, suggesting they are the fractured cultural memories of a single, global hydrological disaster. But this was not just a flood of water. It is specifically theorized to have been a mud flood, a cataclysm that deposited vast layers of silt, clay, and debris across continents, burying the ground floors of the existing world. The evidence for this mud flood, as presented by its believers, is both photographic and architectural. As mentioned, there are countless photographs from the 19th century showing grand buildings with their first-floor windows and archways at or below street level, with new doorways crudely cut into the stonework above. In cities like St. Petersburg, Moscow, Paris, and even New York and Chicago, these images are striking. The official explanation of street-level raising is seen as insufficient to explain the sheer scale and uniformity of this phenomenon. Why would so many global cities, independently, decide to raise their streets by a full story, a logistical nightmare of epic proportions? The alternative explanation is that they had no choice. The mud was already there, a legacy of the Cataclysm. The construction and excavation seen in 19th century photographs were not acts of building anew, but of recovery, digging out the magnificent structures of the previous world from the layers of mud that had entombed them. This, the theory suggests, is why so many new buildings from the 1800s look instantly aged and monumental. They were not new. They were simply being revealed and retrofitted for a new, less advanced society. What could have caused such a planet-wide disaster? Several speculative causes are put forward, often intertwined with other alternative history concepts. One prominent theory involves a close planetary encounter or a cometary impact. The idea suggests that the passage of a large celestial body, perhaps a fragment of a comet, could have exerted immense gravitational and electromagnetic forces on Earth, pulling the oceans from their basins and triggering worldwide tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and the destabilization of the crust, which led to the liquefaction of soil, turning solid ground into a slurry of mud. Another theory posits a sudden pole shift, a rapid geophysical event where the Earth's crust moves over its molten core, displacing continents and causing catastrophic flooding and climatic shifts. These are not mainstream scientific views, but within the framework of the Tartaria theory, they provide a mechanism for a near-instantaneous global reset that could bury cities under dozens of feet of sediment and wipe the civilization from the historical record. The societal impact of such an event would have been total. The theory posits that the Tartarian civilization was highly advanced, potentially possessing free energy, wireless electricity, and other technologies lost to us. The Cataclysm would have shattered this global network. The survivors, thrown back into a pre-industrial state, would have been a fraction of the original population, scattered, traumatized, and stripped of their knowledge. They would have emerged into a world littered with the ruins of a greatness they could no longer comprehend or replicate. The grand buildings, now partially buried, would have seemed like the work of gods or giants. The surviving technology would be magic. In this post-cataclysmic world, power structures would have been upended. The theory suggests that the groups we now know as the ruling families and institutions of the 19th century, the Romanovs, the Habsburgs, the British royal family, the Vatican, the fledgling governments of the Americas, were not the builders of the old world, but the inheritors. They were the ones who managed to organize the survivors, take control of the salvageable old world infrastructure, the palaces, the capitals, the forts, and establish a new world order. This is the core of the Great Reset theory. It proposes that this new elite, realizing the truth of the cataclysm and the advanced nature of the preceding civilization, made a conscious decision to suppress that knowledge. Why? To consolidate their own power. A population that believes it is at the pinnacle of human achievement is easier to control than one that knows it is living in the shadow of a greater, fallen world. Furthermore, understanding the old technology could be dangerous or could empower rivals. So, a massive campaign of historical revisionism was undertaken. The old world was systematically erased. Its history was scrubbed from the records. Its buildings were attributed to new, fictional architects and builders. Its global culture was broken up and relabeled as the disparate histories of separate, often primitive, nations. The Tartars were deliberately misrepresented as primitive steppe nomads. The Cataclysm itself was downplayed, its memory relegated to myth and allegory. What we call the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, in this view, were not rediscoveries of classical knowledge, but the managed, controlled drip-feeding of recovered Tartarian science and art to a public that was told it was creating it all anew. We are not building a new civilization. We are slowly, piece by piece, digging an old one out of the mud and forgetting that we ever found it. If the Tartarian Empire was a global, advanced civilization, what became of its technology? The theory posits that the evidence for it is everywhere, hidden in plain sight, often mislabeled or dismissed as decorative. The most prominent example lies in the very architecture we have already discussed. The grand buildings are not just beautiful, they are, in this view, functional artifacts of a lost science. Their domes, spires, and ornate metalwork are not merely aesthetic. They are proposed to have been components of a wireless energy grid, a global system for distributing power through the air, pioneered by inventors like Nikola Tesla in the late 19th century, but existing long before. The theory suggests that Tesla was not inventing, but reinventing, stumbling upon the principles of a pre-existing Tartarian technology. His Wardenclyffe Tower, intended for wireless power transmission, was not a prototype, but an attempt to replicate the function of the thousands of grand, domed buildings and obelisks that already dotted the landscape. Look, for instance, at the old photographs of World's Fairs and Expositions. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the 1901 Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis, they were filled with magnificent, temporary-looking white buildings, utterly covered in intricate, filigreed electrical wiring and crowned with massive glass globes that glowed with an intense, ethereal light. Conventional history tells us these were early, spectacular demonstrations of the new wonder of electricity. The Tartaria theory asks a different set of questions. Why were these temporary buildings so staggeringly ornate and immense, rivaling the finest architecture of the day? Why does the style so closely mirror the alleged Tartarian architecture? And most importantly, how are they so brilliantly lit? The official story relies on early incandescent bulbs. Yet, the scale and brilliance of the lighting, as seen in photographs and described by attendees, seems extraordinary even by today's standards. The theory suggests these fairs were not demonstrations of new technology, but public displays of recovered old-world tech. They were a way to reintroduce this new electricity to the populace in a controlled setting, while simultaneously presenting it as a novel human achievement, thus reinforcing the new historical narrative. Beyond electricity, the theory points to other anomalous technological hints. The intricate system of star forts, as previously discussed, is proposed to have been part of this global energy system, acting as harmonic resonators or nodes for telluric earth currents. The elaborate plumbing and sewer systems found in ancient Roman cities, which seemed to vanish during the Dark Ages only to reappear in the 19th century, are seen not as a loss and rediscovery, but as the continued use and eventual repair of Tartarian infrastructure. Even the strange, pyramidal structures found on the roofs of many old buildings, often dismissed as mere decorative cupolas, are reinterpreted as functional components, perhaps capacitors or emitters for the wireless energy grid. The sheer prevalence of the obelisk, from ancient Egypt to the Washington Monument, is given a new significance. Rather than being purely symbolic, it is seen as a functional antenna, a component of a global technology that we have forgotten how to use and now only venerate as meaningless monuments. The suppression of this technology is a key tenet of the theory. It argues that the new post-Cataclysm power structure, often referred to broadly as the powers that be, had a vested interest in keeping humanity in a state of controlled, technological infancy. A society dependent on centralized power sources like coal, oil, and later, the electrical grid, is a society that can be easily managed and taxed. A society with access to free, wireless energy from the atmosphere is a society that is inherently free, decentralized, and difficult to control. Therefore, the story goes, any individual or group that came too close to rediscovering and publicly deploying the core principles of Tartarian technology was systematically stopped. The mystery surrounding Nikola Tesla's later years, his funding being cut, and the confiscation of his papers upon his death, is often cited as a prime example of this suppression. His vision of free, wireless energy for all was a direct threat to the emerging fossil fuel-based economy and the control mechanisms of the New World Order. The The technology was not lost by accident. It was actively suppressed to maintain a power imbalance and to prevent humanity from reclaiming its stolen inheritance. This leads to a haunting reevaluation of our own world. The theory suggests that we are not progressing linearly from a primitive past to an advanced future. Instead, we are a post-apocalyptic society, slowly and painfully crawling our way back to a level of technology that was once commonplace. Our Industrial Revolution was not a spontaneous explosion of innovation, but the managed rediscovery and reapplication of salvaged knowledge. The steam engine, the light bulb, the automobile, these were not brilliant new inventions, but crude, materialistic copies of more elegant and advanced Tartarian counterparts. We are surrounded by the ghosts of a better world, living in their repurposed houses, walking on streets built over their buried cities, and using a clumsy, shackled version of the energy that once flowed freely through the air. The feeling of alienation from our modern world, the sense that something is missing, that history doesn't quite add up, is, in this view, a kind of racial memory, an unconscious awareness of the magnificent world that was stolen from us by both catastrophe and design. For an empire to be erased, its people must be disappeared, not just physically, but from the pages of history itself. The conventional historical narrative describes the Tartars, or Tatars, as a collection of Turkic and Mongol peoples, primarily known for the Golden Horde and their role in the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan. They are depicted as fierce, nomadic horsemen from the steppes of Central Asia. The Tartaria theory turns this entirely on its head. It proposes that the name Tartar was deliberately conflated and confused with Tatar to obscure the truth. The true Tartarians, it is suggested, were not the nomadic tribes, but the settled, advanced civilization that built the global infrastructure. The nomadic Tatars were simply one of the many ethnic groups living within the vast, multicultural Tartarian Empire, perhaps even border populations or peripheral tribes. After the Cataclysm, as the new powers rewrote history, they took the name of the empire and assigned it to a minor, stereotypically barbaric group, effectively using them as a historical scapegoat to hide the true nature and scale of the civilization they had supplanted. This rewriting campaign would have required a monumental effort across multiple disciplines. Linguistics, for example, would have been weaponized. The theory points to the creation of the etymological dictionary and the standardization of languages in the 19th century as a key mechanism of control. By defining and fixing the meaning of words, and by creating family trees of languages that separated Europe from Asia, the true linguistic connections that might have pointed to a recent, global culture were severed. Place names were changed en masse. What were once Tartarian cities were given new, local names, their original meanings lost. The academic fields of history and archaeology were founded and institutionalized in this same era, creating a formal, scientific gatekeeping system. Any artifact or structure that did not fit the new, approved timeline was labeled an out-of-place artifact, OOP art, dismissed as a hoax, a forgery, or misdated, and relegated to the fringes of academia. The system was designed to be self-policing. A historian who proposed a timeline divergent from the accepted one would be ridiculed and ostracized. Their career effectively ended. The role of the World's Fairs, beyond their proposed function of displaying recovered technology, was also, according to the theory, psychological. They were massive exercises in social programming. By presenting a breathtaking vision of the future built upon new inventions, they created a powerful sense of forward momentum and progress. They instilled in the public a belief in the official narrative of human history, a slow climb from savagery to civilization, culminating in the glorious present of the 19th and 20th centuries. This narrative actively discouraged people from looking backward for answers. Why would you look for a lost, advanced civilization in the past when you are being shown such wonders being created in the present? The Pharaohs created a collective amnesia, a willing acceptance of the new story, because the new story was so exciting and empowering. They were, in effect, a celebration of the cover-up, a grand party thrown to make everyone forget what had been lost. Then, the new powers that emerged would have had every reason to suppress, displace, or assimilate the remaining Tartarian population. Their distinct culture and knowledge would have been a threat. Over a few generations, through war, disease, and forced integration, a distinct Tartarian ethnic and cultural identity could have been completely erased, their descendants absorbed into the populations of Russia, China, and Europe, unaware of their own ancestral legacy. The silence in the historical record is not proof of their absence, but evidence of the success of the campaign to silence them. Ultimately, the theory presents the erasure of Tartaria as the greatest and most successful conspiracy in human history. It was not the work of a single secret society meeting in a shadowy room, but a convergent effort by the new post-cataclysmic power centers, royal families, governments, religious institutions, and the emerging industrial and banking dynasties. They may have been in competition with each other in many ways, but they shared a common interest in suppressing the truth of the old world, a unified, global history of a shared, advanced civilization would have undermined the nationalist narratives they were fostering to control their populations. The knowledge of free energy and advanced technology would have broken their economic and political monopolies. So, they collectively agreed, either explicitly or implicitly, to build a new world on a foundation of lies, using the salvaged bricks and mortar of the old. The world we know today is the result of that agreement. The mystery of Tartaria, then, is not just about a lost empire. It is about the very nature of history, power, and the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of our place in the world. As we conclude this second part of our journey into the mysterious world of Tartaria, we like to extend a special thank you for listening. If you're finding comfort in these explorations of history's hidden corners, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Slumber Expeditions. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to connect with our global community of curious minds. You can also share which part of the story has captivated you the most so far. It would be wonderful to start a conversation around it. Now, let the profound implications of a reset civilization and a suppressed technology settle in your mind as we prepare for the final part of our expedition, which will explore the philosophical meaning of this mystery and its enduring hold on our imagination. The theory of Tartaria, whether one views it as a compelling alternative history or a complex modern myth, forces a profound philosophical confrontation with the nature of knowledge itself. It challenges the very foundation of how we know what we know about the past. We rely on a consensus of academic institutions, on curated archives, on a linear and documented timeline of human achievement. But what if that consensus is not the result of disinterested scholarship, but the carefully constructed product of a post-cataclysmic power structure? This is the abyss that the Tartaria theory opens. It suggests that history is not a discovered truth, but a manufactured narrative, a story told by the victors of the last Great Reset to consolidate their power and prevent humanity from remembering its true potential. This idea transforms our museums from temples of knowledge into potential halls of curated evidence, our history books from records into scripts, and our archaeologists from discoverers into gatekeepers of an approved story. The feeling of unease this generates is not just about a lost empire. It is a crisis of epistemic trust, a questioning of whether our entire understanding of the human journey is a deliberate illusion. This leads to a deeper, more unsettling question about human consciousness and memory. If a global civilization with advanced technology and a unified culture was truly erased just a few centuries ago, what does that do to our sense of cultural and genetic memory? Proponents of the theory often point to the universal human fascination with a lost golden age, a theme that permeates mythology from the Greek concept of the ages of man to the Hindu yugas. These are typically dismissed as allegorical or as references to a deep, prehistoric past. But the Tartaria theory posits that these stories are not ancient. They are recent. They are the fragmented, traumatized, and mythologized memories of a real event that occurred within the last 1,000 years. The sense of nostalgia for a time that never was, the feeling that the world is old and worn out, the recurring motifs of a great flood and a fallen Tower of Babel, these are interpreted not as poetic archetypes, but as the lingering psychic scars of a civilization-wide trauma. Our collective unconscious, in this view, is not dreaming of primordial times, but quietly screaming about a forgotten yesterday. The theory also inverts our modern narrative of progress. We are taught to see human history as a steady, if bumpy, ascent from primitive hunter-gatherer societies to our current technological zenith. The Tartaria theory proposes the opposite, a cyclical model of history, where civilizations rise to incredible heights of sophistication, only to be periodically wiped out by catastrophic resets, plunging humanity back into a dark age. In this model, we are not pioneers on the cutting edge of discovery. We are amnesiacs, slowly and painfully rediscovering the ruins of our own past and mistaking our excavations for inventions. The Industrial Revolution becomes not a sudden explosion of genius, but the managed rediscovery of salvageable Tartarian technology, steam power being a crude, materialistic version of their free energy, the light bulb a dim echo of their atmospheric illumination. This perspective is deeply humbling. It suggests that our greatest achievements are but pale imitations, and that our current path, reliant on destructive fossil fuels and centralized power, is a degenerative deviation from a more elegant and sustainable technological tree that was once mastered and then lost. Engaging with the Tartaria theory, even as a speculative exercise, is an act of epistemological rebellion. It encourages a mindset of questioning authority and re-evaluating evidence with one's own eyes. Why does this building look so old? Why is this street level so high? What was the original purpose of this star fort? This mindset is inherently anti-dogmatic. It rejects the appeal to authority that is the bedrock of modern academia and invites individuals to become their own historians, their own archaeologists. This has a powerful psychological appeal in an age where trust in institutions is eroding. It provides a grand, unified, and emotionally satisfying explanation for the oddities and inconsistencies that anyone can observe in their own city's oldest quarters. It turns a mundane walk through a historic district into a detective story, a search for clues of a hidden world. The theory is less about proving the existence of Tartaria definitively and more about the liberating act of questioning the official story. It is a narrative that empowers the individual observer against the monolithic narrative of the state and the academy. Ultimately, the philosophical weight of the Tartaria theory lies in its implications for human freedom and potential. If the theory were true, it would mean that humanity is capable of far more than we are currently taught. It would mean that the societal structures we take for granted, nation-states, capitalist economies, centralized energy grids, are not the inevitable outcomes of human progress, but temporary, perhaps even oppressive, arrangements built upon the ruins of a freer and more advanced world. The suppression of this history, in this view, is the ultimate tool of control. A population that believes it is at the pinnacle of achievement is complacent. A population that knows it has fallen from a greater height is dangerous. It yearns for restoration. The mystery of Tartaria, therefore, becomes more than a historical puzzle. It becomes a metaphor for a lost human potential, a call to look beyond the horizons of our accepted reality and question whether the boundaries of our world are real or merely the walls of a prison we have been taught to believe is a palace. To explore the Tartaria theory with any intellectual honesty, one must engage sincerely with the powerful counterarguments posed by conventional historians, geologists, and archaeologists. The dialogue between belief and skepticism is where the mystery is most productively examined. The most straightforward rebuttal concerns the maps. Skeptics argue that the persistent depiction of Tartaria on European maps is a classic case of cartographic lag, the repetition of outdated information. The name originated from the historical Tartars and the Mongol Empire. The Tartar spelling often used in Europe evoked Tartarus, the classical underworld, adding a layer of demonization. As European knowledge of Inner Asia was limited and often based on classical and medieval sources like Marco Polo, they used this blanket term for a vast, poorly understood region. The disappearance of Tartaria from maps in the 19th century simply reflects the moment when direct exploration, Russian expansion, and precise surveying finally allowed cartographers to replace the vague label with specific geographical and political names like Siberia, Chinese Empire, and Russian Empire. It was not an erasure, but an increase in accuracy. The architectural argument faces perhaps the most detailed and documented skepticism. Every one of the anomalous buildings cited by the theory, from the US Capitol to the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, has an extensively papered history. Construction records, architectural plans, payrolls for workers, receipts for materials, and contemporary newspaper accounts detailing their years-long construction are available in archives. The notion that these were pre-existing structures is directly contradicted by this mountain of primary source documentation. The partially buried first floors are convincingly explained by urban development. In the 19th century, cities were rapidly modernizing. They raised street levels to improve sanitation, install sewer and water lines, and prevent flooding. This was a messy, protracted process, perfectly captured in photographs of the era, where a single building might be excavated down to its original foundation while the street around it was built up. The idea of a global mud flood is dismissed by geologists who point to stratigraphic evidence showing that the layers of soil and sediment around these cities accumulated gradually over centuries, not in a single cataclysmic event. The star forts, for all their geometric mystery, fit perfectly into the well-documented evolution of military architecture. The Trace Italienne, or Bastion Fort, was a direct response to the power of cannery. The design was published in widely circulated engineering manuals and was adopted globally by competing colonial powers because it was effective. Their construction, while Herculean, is attested to by detailed records from military engineers. The fact that they were often built on the sites of older fortifications is standard practice. You build your defenses where they are strategically needed. Their eventual obsolescence was due to the development of rifled artillery and high-explosive shells in the mid-19th century, which could pulverize their high stone walls, leading to their universal decommissioning. There is no need to invoke a lost global energy grid when the historical context of warfare, colonialism, and technological competition provides a complete and coherent explanation for their proliferation and decline. Regarding the Cataclysm itself, the scientific counterarguments are formidable. While flood myths are universal, their details vary wildly, and archaeologists and folklorists attribute them to the universal human experience of local river floods and tsunamis, which would be memorable and traumatic events for any community. There is no geological evidence for for a global mud flood in the last 1,000 years. Ice core samples, tree rings, and sediment layers show a continuous and relatively stable climatic record for the last several millennia, with no indication of a recent, planet-wide extinction-level event. The Great Reset theory also faces a profound logistical problem. How could every single culture, from the Japanese to the Portuguese to the Sioux, all independently agree to participate in a cover-up of such magnitude? How could they all perfectly synchronize their new historical narratives and eliminate every trace of the old world from their records, their folklore, and their physical landscape, all without a single leak or contradiction? The scale of the conspiracy required is, to skeptics, far less plausible than the simpler explanation that the Tartaria theory is a modern folk mythology, a compelling story we tell to make sense of a complex and often poorly taught history. In the end, the most powerful skeptical argument is one of parsimony, often called Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. The conventional historical model, that Tartaria was a cartographic placeholder for a poorly known region, that grand buildings were built in the 18th and 19th centuries by documented architects and laborers, that star forts are a logical evolution of military science, and that flood myths are localized events, requires no hidden conspiracies, no lost civilizations, and no global cataclysms. It is a model built on a vast, interlocking framework of verifiable evidence. The Tartaria theory, by contrast, requires one to believe in a catastrophic event for which there is no physical proof, a worldwide conspiracy of silence with no tangible whistleblowers, and the systematic destruction or fabrication of millions of documents across every culture on Earth. For the skeptic, the choice is clear. The official history, for all its imperfections and unanswered questions, is a far more reliable guide to the past than a narrative built upon the silence of evidence and the grandeur of what might have been. Despite the weight of skeptical arguments, the Tartaria theory refuses to fade into obscurity. Its persistence in the digital age is a cultural phenomenon in its own right, revealing deep-seated yearnings and anxieties within the modern psyche. Its appeal is not necessarily rooted in its historical accuracy, but in its narrative power. It functions as a grand, unifying conspiracy theory that connects disparate architectural oddities, cartographic curiosities, and historical ambiguities into a single, thrilling story of loss and cover-up. In a world overflowing with information but often lacking meaning, the Tartaria theory provides a secret key, a way of reading the landscape that makes the observer feel enlightened, privy to a hidden truth that the masses are too blind or too trusting to see. It transforms the mundane modern world into a landscape of mystery, where every old building becomes a clue and every historical inconsistency a piece of evidence in a great, unsolved crime against humanity's memory. The theory also resonates powerfully with a growing disillusionment with official narratives. In an era of deepfakes, misinformation, and a documented history of government deception, the idea that our foundational history might also be a fabrication feels, to some, like a logical extension. The Tartaria theory is a symptom of this broader crisis of trust. It takes the suspicion that we are being lied to about current events and projects it backward onto the entire timeline of human civilization. IT provides an origin story for this feeling of deception, suggesting that the very bedrock of our identity, our history, is the primary lie. This is both terrifying and, in a strange way, empowering. It is terrifying because it implies we are living in a world of illusions, but empowering because it suggests that by uncovering this one great lie, we can unlock our true potential and reclaim a stolen inheritance. Furthermore, the theory taps into a romantic, almost religious, longing for a lost golden age. The notion that the world was once more beautiful, more advanced, and more spiritually in tune is a powerful archetype. Tartaria, in this context, becomes a secular Atlantis, a technological Eden from which we were cast out not by sin, but by catastrophe and conspiracy. This narrative offers a form of solace. It explains the perceived drabness, corruption, and environmental degradation of the modern world not as the price of progress, but as the evidence of our fall. It allows one to believe that humanity is not inherently destructive, but that we are merely the damaged descendants of a greater people living in their ruins and struggling to remember their grace. This is a profoundly hopeful story, as it implies that our better nature is not ahead of us, but behind us, waiting to be rediscovered. The digital age has been the perfect incubator for this mystery. The internet allows for the instantaneous sharing of anomalous photographs, the collaborative piecing together of maps, and the formation of global communities of Tartarian researchers. Online, the theory is not a static text but a living, evolving folklore. Someone in Missouri can post a picture of their local 19th century courthouse, and someone in Turkey can respond with a picture of a nearly identical building, and together they can weave a new thread in the global tapestry of the theory. This participatory aspect is key to its appeal. It is a puzzle that anyone can contribute to solving, a story that anyone can help write. It democratizes history, taking it out of the hands of tenured professors and putting it into the hands of amateur sleuths and curious observers, fostering a sense of community and shared purpose among its adherents. As our Slumber expedition draws to a close, we are left not with a definitive answer, but with a lingering question that hangs in the air like the mist over a ruined city. The true legacy of the Tartaria theory may not be in proving the existence of a lost empire, but in the questions it forces us to ask about the nature of history, the fragility of civilization, and the reliability of our own memory. It reminds us that the past is not a closed book, but a story that is constantly being told and retold. So, as you rest, let your mind wander through these shadowy corridors of time. Look at the oldest building in your town with a new curiosity. Wonder about the street names and the layers of pavement beneath your feet. The theory of Tartaria, true or not, serves as a powerful invitation to look at the world with wonder again, to question the stories we've been told, and to remember that history is filled with silence, and in those silences, the echoes of forgotten worlds can sometimes almost be heard.